Welcome to Season 23 of the Business Infrastructure Podcast. Hi there, I'm Alicia Butler Pierre, host of the Business Infrastructure Podcast. Before we get started, subscribe to this channel, hit the notification bell so that you'll know when other episodes come. This season features a Growth Strategies Masterclass. In the last episode, you heard our second lesson in preparing for your company's growth strategy. We learned about the X Matrix as a tool for linking strategy with execution. In this episode, you'll get a glimpse of how we use that to make sure our idea for an online course doesn't just remain an idea, but actually becomes a reality. This is episode 289, how we used the X Matrix to create a strategy for our online course. Hi, I'm Alicia Butler Pierre, the host and producer of the Business Infrastructure Podcast. And I'm so excited about this particular episode because I get to show you how to use this thing right here. This is basically a really large printout of an X Matrix. And in case you're wondering, an X Matrix is a tool that you can use to link your strategic growth plan to actual implementation. In other words, making sure that you actually are able to execute that growth strategy that you and your team may have put in place. Now, if you watched the last episode, we had Kenya Moses. He's an X Matrix expert. He talked about how to use it, but now we're going to use ourselves as the guinea pigs so that you can actually see how we use this X Matrix to develop our own growth strategy around an online course. Okay, so the online course is an idea that we've already vetted and validated using the Lean Canvas. If you haven't checked out that episode, make sure you check that one out as well. But now we're going to take the idea that we know for sure people actually want and will pay for. We're going to develop a strategy around it. And this, again, this tool right here, this X Matrix, is the tool that we're going to use to make sure that we can do that. So let me go ahead and open up an actual Microsoft Excel version of that X Matrix. Okay, as you can see, I am now sharing an X Matrix on my screen. I apologize that it's a little small. I'm working on my smaller Surface Book laptop, but bear with me as I explain at a really high level what our X Matrix looks like. As a reminder, you can go to YouTube to watch the video version of this episode so that you can see this. Some of you may already be on YouTube, but for those of you who are only listening to the podcast audio, just know that you can go to YouTube to actually be able to see, if you can, the X Matrix that I am now showing on the screen. This, again, is a snapshot of what we did with our work with Kenya Moses. It's not the entire X Matrix, and that is intentional because there's, frankly, some information that we don't want to disclose for confidentiality and proprietary reasons. But I promise you will see enough to be able to get the gist of how to actually complete one. This is a Microsoft Excel document, and you can actually download this template that I'm showing here from the show notes at businessinfrastructure.tv. As you can see, there is a large X. You'll notice there's a gray square right almost in the center of the entire matrix. And there's an X going across. There are 4 main positions, if you will, around this X. These are the clock positions that you heard Kenya Moses actually describe in the previous episode. We'll start here in the 6 o'clock position. I had to think about that for a minute. But yes, this is the 6 o'clock position, and this is the position where you actually start to fill out the X Matrix. And the idea is that you start at the 6 o'clock position and you start to move about the X in a clockwise fashion. So you start here with your 3 to 5 year break
breakthrough objectives. So for us, we specifically put the year 2026 because the year right now is 2024, and 3 years from now, we will actually be in the year 2026. And we simply started to list the different goals or breakthrough objectives that we have that are longer term. As we move clockwise into the 9 o'clock position on the X matrix, you can see here where you translate your longer term 3 to 5 year breakthrough objectives into annual breakthrough objectives. So again, if there is something that you have identified that is a longer term 3-year, 5-year goal, what can you do within the existing year, for us 2024, to make sure that you are working toward the achievement of that overall long-term goal? As we move up again in the clockwise position, we are now in the 12 o'clock noon position. These are top-level improvement priorities. In other words, I like to think of these as projects. What are the specific things that you can do within the current year to actually make sure that you accomplish those annual breakthrough objectives? And then finally, I shouldn't say finally, but the last true position along the X matrix itself, in the 3 o'clock position, are targets to improve. Again, this is on an annual basis. So that is where you want to be as specific as you possibly can be. Now, I will move over to the right of the X matrix, and this is where we start to list our resources. Who will be primarily responsible for the different top-level improvement priorities that you identify versus who might have secondary responsibility. And there are these different circles, and I'll get to that in just a moment, but I wanted to make sure that I talked about the entire matrix overall. When you're filling out the X matrix, I like to think of it as a funnel, because as you start with your 3 to 5 year breakthrough objectives, you're very high level, you're specific, but it's still high level. But as you start to go around the X matrix, filling in even more information, you're starting to drill down into the details. So you'll notice that I also have some areas highlighted in yellow. Let me explain why. These are the areas that I really want to focus on because it relates specifically to the online course idea. So let's start here in the 6 o'clock position. We have 3 different rows underneath the section called 3 to 5 year breakthrough objectives. The first one says increase top line revenue from X3 to Y3. We actually do know those numbers. We just aren't disclosing it for confidentiality purposes. The second breakthrough objective that we have here is transition the business model to 100% training. Right now at Equilibria, our business model is 100% consulting. And then a third breakthrough objective, that's longer term, is to ultimately sell the business. That is the goal, is that in 3 years, by the year 2026, which isn't that far away, that we will actually, in fact, sell the business. And there are some specific things that we need to start doing now in 2024 to make sure that's possible. Now, you'll also notice that as I start to move about the X matrix again in a clockwise position, I'm now at the 9 o'clock position. If we look at the longer term breakthrough objective, that's transition business model to 100% training. This is what we're ultimately going to link the online course idea to. This is how we're literally plotting that vetted and validated idea for an online course into the company's overall growth strategy. Just stay with me for a second here. I'm only going to focus on the 2 areas in the annual policy breakthrough objectives section in the 9 o'clock position because it directly correlates to the longer term objective to transition the business model to 100% training. So obviously that's not something that can happen within the year, but what we can do within the year, a goal of ours, is to transition the business model to 75% consulting, 25% training. So in other words, we're going from top of the year, having a 100% consulting business model, to by the end of 2024, December, we will go from 100% consulting to about 75% consulting, 25% training. And another key annual objective that we want to have in place is to develop key strategic partnerships. If you'll recall, earlier in this episode, I mentioned that my word for this year is partnerships, because we recognize that there are other people in that space that have the ability to bring us business that it would take us a really long time to try to develop some of those relationships on our own. You'll also notice that there are some circles here. These dark circles that you see actually show the correlation between two different sections at any given moment along the X matrix. For example, there is a circle that is connecting transition business model to 100% training as a long-term goal, with transition the business model to 75% consulting, 25% training. These circles, again, show the correlation. It's literally showing us how everything is aligned along this X matrix. So in other words, you should never have anything on your X matrix that cannot be directly correlated to something else that is on your X matrix. I'll now move on to the 12 o'clock noon position, our top level improvement priorities. Again, I like to think of these as high-level projects, if you will. So I'll just focus on the things that we have highlighted in yellow, because again, that speaks specifically to the online course idea. One of those top-level improvement priorities is to partner with federal government and corporate lead sources. So again, those are the partnerships that I just spoke about. We also have an idea to take one of the seasons from the Business Infrastructure podcast and launch it as a standalone show, because it, in fact, is a demonstration of our ability to provide training in the form of a podcast. And then finally, build a tiered training program for classroom and online instruction. So these are very specific, targeted things that we have to do in order to meet our annual objectives for 2024. Okay, so now that we have talked about the top level improvement priorities, or projects as I like to refer to it, we can start to look at the targets to improve. But before we go there, let's move across all the way to the far right of this diagram. We're actually outside of the X, if you will, or maybe you can think of it as an extension of the X. Also in the 3 o'clock position. This is where I have initials here, but typically you would put people's names. Who is actually going to be responsible for those different top level improvement priorities? So I have some initials of myself, some people on the team, and also some of the key strategic partners that we are actively in the process of formalizing our business relationships. But you'll notice there are some circles that are completely filled and other circles that are not filled. In other words, the completely filled in, totally black circles represents primary responsibility. And those where you only see a circle but it's not filled or shaded in represents secondary responsibility. And all that's saying is, for every single one of those top level improvement priorities, who ultimately has the primary responsibility? So again, I have myself in here, and there are some moments or instances where you might have people who are both primarily responsible and those who you may identify as having secondary responsibility. I'll go back over toward the left, also in the 3 o'clock position along the X matrix. And this is the final section to complete, which is the targets to improve. This is where you want to, again, get even more specific. How are you going to measure success? You can also think of these as KPIs, or key performance indicators. Again, focusing on those that I have highlighted in yellow because they specifically tie into this online course idea. 2 of them: win 1 corporate training contract by the 3rd quarter of 2024, win 1 federal government training contract by by the end of the third quarter of 2024. So again, those are very specific. It's actually time-based, it's relevant, it's following that SMART model, which is specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-based. And we'll learn a little bit more about that as we drill down into the action plans. And speaking of action plans, you'll notice here at the very bottom of this file, you'll notice that there are 3 tabs. One is called the top level matrix, which is the X matrix itself. And then there's the course action plan, which is another tab, and an organizational level targets to improve list. Those are the details that we're about to drill into, those other 2 tabs, the action plan and those targets to improve listing. That's actually what we're going to cover in great detail in the next episode, because not only are we going to talk about what we're going to do, but we're going to get very specific into how we actually do it. Now, just to give you an idea of how long it took us to work on this X matrix, this is something that we started here at Equilibria the first week of January this year, 2024, with Kenya Moses. And it took us 4 different 1-hour sessions. We were doing things on a combination of Zoom and Microsoft Teams, if I recall. Lots of great conversations. So it's not that it should normally take that long. As Kenya mentioned, Kenya said it really depends on the extent of the conversations. But for us, it was our first time formally doing it for our company. So we really wanted to make sure we gave it a really good first try. And again, lots of great conversations that came about as a result. Now, that time that I just shared with you did not include the time that it took for us to build the action plans. That's again where we're going to drill down into even more details. We'll specifically identify the tasks that are needed to accomplish the goals that you see here on this X matrix. And how you do that is what we'll cover in the next episode of this Growth Strategies Masterclass.
Okay, now that you've seen how we took an X matrix and used that as a tool to kind of plot out our 3-year strategic goal, 1-year strategic goal, and all of the projects and initiatives and metrics that we're going to use to actually implement these goals and track our progress along the way, it's your turn. It's your turn to go ahead and complete your own X matrix. If you're looking for a free template, make sure you drop down in the description box below. We'll provide a link that you can go to actually download that template. You can also go directly to businessinfrastructure.tv, where you can also download a free copy of the X matrix. So there's a second portion to that X matrix. Remember the action plan portion. That's what we're going to cover in the next video. In fact, we're going to take those action plans and actually put them into project plans using some tools that you probably already have access to. So that's coming up next, because again, it does us no good to come up with the strategy if we don't actually have a way of visibly seeing how we can track our progress against that goal. So come join me in the next video. I'll see you soon. Make sure you subscribe, click the notification bell so that you don't miss when that episode drops, and I'll see you in that next video.